I've probably done 1,000 drunk driving cases in my career. Some of them have resulted in deaths, like his case, tragically. And some of my clients are second or repeat offenders. And obviously, if you have a criminal record, you get treated differently. The thing with Michael Vick was what got called into question is, and he certainly had donated lots of money and time and had done all that, but the people that were character witnesses, the question then becomes, well, how well did you really know this person? He's, on Friday night, he's showing up at giving out turkeys at the, at the Boys and Girls Club, and on Saturday night he's at a dogfight. The other thing that I think you have to remember about that is when you're involved in a case, and people don't understand, Michael Vick did not go get prosecuted for dogfighting. He got prosecuted for racketeering. He got prosecuted.
Someone with credible evidence and information that in fact didn't have that, that was politically motivated. And if it didn't exploit us as one of our Achilles heels, it certainly was in that case. So your role is to, I think, and it's so hard to do in this 24-hour news cycle, we're supposed to reserve judgment. We're supposed to get all the facts. Well, we never get all the facts because a good criminal defense attorney is not going to, they're only going to let us know the facts that are going to help his client. And then we have this prosecutor who turned out to be criminal, really, in what he did. So it becomes very, very difficult. And again, in this, we want to know now. We want to know exactly what you think. We just heard about this Duke case. Now we're going to put you on TV, and you either condemn those kids or support this young woman who turned out to have credibility issues of her own. And I think at times it's almost an impossible task because you're taught as journalists to stick to the facts and withhold judgment, and yet as the public isn't doing that, the analysts aren't doing that, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on reporters today, I think, and maybe Lee, you can speak to this as well. It's when you want to hold back, and I kept saying, I want to talk to this coach. Let me sit down with this coach before we go any further. Let me spend some time with this coach. Let me talk to these players, and the stories were horrific, horrific, and yet the only reason they talked to me was because they hadn't seen my name associated with all the other stories. It wasn't because they thought I was some great person or some great journalist. It's just that I hadn't waded in yet. I waded in late. And in that case, in that particular case, it benefited me because we got a great story. But to me, it wasn't even about the story at that point. It's about lives that were being destroyed.
Lee?
Yeah, I think that a lot of journalists deal with the one set of facts. They're dealing with the same set of facts, and it's really important to go to the source and to actually dig, read everything that's available. That's what I do. If the lawyers aren't participating, then I go and I talk to every possible person that I can, and I just go back to the core, that basic thing that I started in this business with, is reporting. And I can tell you that I can remember Darren Williams, who was a Denver Bronco that was murdered a few years ago on New Year's Eve in Denver. And I saw the story broke, and I got on a plane to go to his funeral. And at that point, the information gathering began. And just like you said, I think that so few people try to be enterprising in terms of going and actually doing more reporting and actually talking to the people involved in the story, because it's all about the story. And so in that case, I established a relationship with the family, with the young men that were with him when his car was peppered with 14 shots, and he was found killed that day. And over time, we built trust, and you would be amazed at the information that I found out. I mean, the fact that I was willing to go to their living room and sit down and get that whole story, and then to go back and read some of the things that were written in the local press it was just unbelievable. But the thing that really struck me was that I don't think there was one person from the local press that got on a plane and went to Fort Worth, Texas to be with the guys that were in that car that night. And so my point is, it still goes to reporting, and that's always what I'm going to rely on first and foremost, and that's the beginning and that's the end.
Okay. Yes.
I'm curious whether you think the media treatment of sports people who get in trouble with the law is different from the media treatment of other celebrity defendants.
Okay, the question is whether the media treats sports celebrity defendants different from other celebrity defendants.
I will tell you this. It's highly unpopular to write about sports celebrities who have been in trouble. Fans don't want to hear it. They really don't. The people in San Francisco did not want to hear about Barry Bonds and his steroid use. I think in Atlanta that may have been a little different. The Michael Vick thing became so hot, that was different. But whenever there's an athlete in trouble in Boston for anything, the fans do not want to hear about it. You'll get emails, you'll get your own threats from writing about it, from reporting on it. Fans are shorts for fanatics. They just don't want to know, they just want to watch their sports. Don't clutter up my mind. I don't care what kind of guy he is. Can he catch the ball or can he? Can he shoot the three-pointer or can he? I don't want to know all this stuff. Don't tell me it. I don't want to know it. And so it's a very unpopular position to be in, frankly. And some journalists really don't even have the stomach for it because it's you take your own shots along the way. So I don't think people shy. I think there's someone at every newspaper. No one shies away from those stories, but they're not fun. They're not fun to cover at all.
I think I've had a couple of cases that, at least on a local level, that involve people who were high profile that weren't athletes, and I don't. My experience is that it's not as intense, I guess, if that's the right word. I mean, I harken back to Michael Vick, and I guess I'm not a good enough person not to have taken some pleasure in the fact that one of the people who denounced him on the floor of the U.S. Congress later got indicted. I thought I like that. Maybe that makes me a bad person. And, I don't know if that answers your question, but I certainly think that the athletes for the most part are a lot younger. They're not quote unquote leaders. They're people that people use to escape from their daily life by watching whatever game they play. But I would say that the two biggest, with Iverson and with Vick, those were, they were covered, as much as anything could possibly have been, and I think that when it's maybe apropos to our society that it's not that big a news anymore when a politician is crooked, but it is when somebody who's an athlete does something wrong.
I'd have to agree because I feel that in a lot of these stories, the money is a factor. The idea of the young, rich, spoiled athlete comes into play, and when you put race on top of that, in some cases, I think it played out in the Michael Vick case. I've seen it. I saw it in the Minnesota Vikings boat party case where there were all kinds of people at that party, but there were 4 young black men that were charged, and ultimately they were all free. But the reality was there were some horrific racial stereotypes that came out in that case, and disproportionately in the NBA and the NFL, the population is disproportionately racial minority, and so these athletes have to be very careful about the situations that they get in that could potentially bring some of these stereotypes to life, because then once again it goes back to the brand and the way that they're going to be portrayed in the media and perceived. Yes, they make mistakes and they do things, but the question is to what extent what kind of price do they end up paying, and how is the coverage handled? And so in my case, I've seen very specific instances in which individuals, I think athletes in particular, have been, there's no sympathy for them. I don't think there's sympathy for a guy who's 23 years old who just signed a $20 million contract with $10 million of it being guaranteed money.
Unless he's wearing the jersey that you go to sleep with every night and he's going to throw 6 touchdowns on the game you bet on.
I think it depends on what the person did.
I think.
To that.
Christopher, go ahead.
I think Jackie's right. I remember I kind of broke up the media into the sports media, including the talking head sports radio and the sports journalists like ESPN and the people like Tony who actually covered like the courthouse on a daily basis, and it was a quite different world. I agree with Jackie. I remember doing some interviews with talk radio and sports television in Cleveland, and all they cared about was, when's he going to play? Has he been throwing passes with Brady Quinn? Is he working out? Is he in shape? What's his 40 time? Is he ready to play this year? And we would give interviews to non-sports journalists, and it was, how can he sleep at night after, this tragedy, and asking all, technical legal questions. But I agree with Jackie that I found that there's a bias that if for sports fans, if he can help your team, they're willing to pretty much ignore anything, and that's what I found. And then after the case was over, the Cleveland fans, wanted to make sure that he never played there again. So it works both ways.
Question right here.
Yes, I know. And I'm probably in the minority in this country, but I tend to not be as interested in what happens to the assets, or physical assets or digital assets, like training and different types of things for athletes, and whether it is as a one of the perpetrators, like denial, or as victims, it's more on the impact that those episodes have on our society. And we touched a little bit on this, but I feel that we kept firing away. And in that, in telling the stories and in shaping how this is going to be perceived, the media have a central role. And I'm wondering what you think that the media should be doing as leading essentially the storytelling about what's happening, so that the impact is not as negative as it's been, whether it's for African Americans in some cases, or athletes in others.
Okay, so it's a very thoughtful and articulate question, and I'll try to reduce it to a thought. Are journalists doing enough to cover the story in its completeness, including the impact of the event on society? And I'll throw it out there.
I just don't think that there's a silver bullet in terms of covering this stuff. I mean, I feel that the formula is the journalist needs to do the most thorough job that they can do in reporting the facts and giving people facts, in some cases interpreting the facts when you do go on and you speak about it, but really just being very thorough in the interpretation. I mean, I don't consider myself an advocacy journalist. I don't think that it's my role all the time to teach society how to think on issues. The best thing that I can do for the public is to get it right. And I think that with the emergence of all of these different versions or kinds of media now, you're seeing, I'm not saying that people should be prevented from blogging, but you do have to consider the source. And a lot of the information that you're seeing kind of takes on a life of its own. And if, in the case of the girl from the University of New Mexico who's now suspended indefinitely, I think that's exactly what happened. It was just people in the media that necessarily just wanted to kind of spin that story without looking at all of the facts. How has the NCAA handled some of the cases relative to male athletes? And why can LeGarrette Blount go and knock somebody out on the field and turn the whole stadium upside down, and then this young woman makes a mistake and pulls someone's hair and she's kicked out? But if that's the popular story and it's getting momentum on the blogs and it's getting momentum with the video that was put up that had that immediate impact that affected people emotionally, then people just go off and they lose what's really important, which is reporting the facts.
Let me follow up on behalf of our audience here and sharpen it with a more aggressive hypothesis. And I'm going to separate college sports from professional sports at this point. So I'm going to separate my alma mater, Duke, and not treat that storm as quite the same as the professional storm. So here's a cynical hypothesis that there's a seriously disproportionate amount of misconduct by professional athletes. That the lifestyle of the professional athlete today in major sports lends itself to habits that are out of control. Sexual promiscuity, sexual aggression and rape, violence, drinking, drugs, gun culture, party culture, being part of a celebrity atmosphere in which you think you're above the law and above others. And so it's no accident that if we all sat around brainstorming, we'd probably come up with 50 cases since OJ that were perfect storms, mini storms, medium, And in a sense, that's what's not being covered enough. Our league's doing enough. Our team's doing enough. Is there a kind of endemic thing here that's a bit out of control and out of balance? And for reasons that Jackie suggested, no one wants to go there because we love sports and we don't want to have to face up to that side of all this that we don't see, the parties after the game and the celebrity culture, the extraordinary amounts of money that often people that come from poverty suddenly have. And so just following up on that side, I'm interested in your thoughts on that hypothesis, which could be, of course, totally wrong. But
well, let me address that from a legal standpoint. I've seen a lot of human behavior. I was telling Jackie before this started. And here's what I would say about that. I think that the reason people do that is human desire. And you will never have enough prosecutors, police, laws to change human desire. 5,000 years ago, the Chinese imported opium and they started selling people to buy opium. So the reason, one of the things I've done in my career, I've represented gang members, a lot of gang members. And the amount of money that's spent on illegal drugs in this country every year dwarfs by a factor of I don't know how much the amount of money that's spent in sports. There's a statistic out that since 1975, there's been over 100 million man-years of incarceration imposed in drug cases, and the amount of money that's been spent on drug prosecutions is some number with so many zeros you can't even say it. The drug problem's worse than it was in 1975. Segueing that back to your question is that from my standpoint, my little slice of the world that I see, the behavior that athletes engage in, promiscuity, spending money like it's going out of style, living in the moment, I don't see that as being something that is just athletes. Now, in terms of reporting that, it's certainly reported more that, the star quarterback, was seen at this party doing this, or what's the swimmer's name, Michael Phelps. How many 22-year-old kids took a bong hit somewhere that night that was on somebody's cell phone? So certainly it gets reported more, but I don't think the behavior, I think it's human behavior, whether you're a talented athlete or a talented English major or journalism student, not that I'm accusing anybody.
We don't have any of that here.
On Saturday night, but that would be my take on that.
Okay.
Well, and you had asked, are the leagues doing enough to combat this? And I have to tell you, there are programs in place in every professional sport, and they're significant programs. And because of human nature and human behavior, they go there and they half listen, and they probably have their earphones hidden underneath their ears, and they don't care. Satch Sanders, who played for the Celtics for many years, ran the rookie program for the NBA, I was doing an investigative series on athletes who go broke, who lose all their money. And we were focusing on the NBA. And the biggest reason these athletes were losing all their money was because they were having children out of wedlock.
Right.
And they had to pay child support.
Right.
And they were mistaken in thinking that once they lost their job and weren't making $2.4 million, that they didn't have to pay child support anymore. Well, guess what, boys? Yes, you do. And you're going to pay child support till all your money is gone. And these guys were ending up broke. So Satch Sanders spent and I sat in on the sessions because that was part of why we were doing this series. And, he's talking to these young players and saying to them, you cannot do this and expect that it's going to work for you. You're going to siphon away all your money. And he was taking, okay, the average rookie salary is this. If you have 3 children out of wedlock, this is how much it's going to cost you. This is how much money you're going to have left over. And we all know you want to buy 4 cars your rookie year too. And, so they talked about what should you spend your money on? How should you handle your account? Do you have an accountant that's taking care of your money for you because you're not going to have time? Not your best friend from down the block. They go through this. The NFL has an incredibly comprehensive program, same thing. But human nature is that these guys, they have the money, they think they know, and you're some old guy that played 1,000,000 years ago and I never heard of you, so I'm not going to listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the media does a great job of reporting on this. Your story that you just talked about. I mean, and I've seen Sports Illustrated do some stuff on it. But I don't think that is the whole story. I think that there are other athletes on the other side of the equation that have done a lot. And, as you
a lot that's good, you mean?
Yeah, Donte Stallworth was not a horrible guy when he made that mistake. And so I don't see a problem with that. And as a matter of fact, I would probably question some of the way that you frame the question, because I feel that throughout the society and throughout the population, as you said, you have people getting DUIs. And at age 23 and 24, I mean, I don't know that these athletes are any different than a lot of people. It just gets
focused on.
There's so much scrutiny. And, so when you talk to these, I will say one more thing. The NFL will pay up to $15,000 a year for these players to complete their postgraduate education.
And that drives me crazy. I got to be honest, that drives me crazy. You're making all that money, pay for school yourself. Pay for these kids to go to school. That drives me nuts.
We'll vote for that.
The percentage of players that take advantage of it is very small. But I think I've seen in the past, you would know a lot more about this than I do, because I don't really always cover sports. But from what I've seen in the past 5 years, I've seen incredible improvement from the NFL, largely because of the pressure, right? But they've responded. When Darren Williams was killed, the commissioner, everybody was down there. They had a huge press conference. They were there with the family, and I think they do a lot to help these kids.
Yeah, I agree with the rest of the panel that, I think because they're athletes and celebrities that, what the mistakes they make, get reported. And, down in Miami, it's a joke on Miami Beach, that there's many kids in their 20s who are trust fund kids. They don't have jobs, and they go out 7 nights a week, and they're doing drugs and drinking and all kinds of things, and they get in trouble, but it's not reported in the media. And, the same thing with the athletes. What Lee and I were talking about was, what I've found is where the problems arise is go back to, the family structure. When I met Stallworth's family, they came in from California, and his mother and brother and sister and his friends, I knew right away, just by meeting them, the character that he had, because he had a strong nucleus around him. Conversely, we were talking about some of these athletes, that basketball players that I've represented, or football players, and they have these entourages that surround them. They have high school friends that are still on their payroll 10 years later, and they have, other than, Jackie was talking about child support, but they have these enormous payrolls of people that really don't do anything. And then when the money dries up, then problems arise. But I also see with athletes, they do get invited to things just like, entertainers, and that's going to lead obviously to some situations. And so, it's a double-edged sword, because there's a lot of things out there that can, bite them in the you-know-what.
They get invited to things, but they also have an incredible opportunity that we don't always get. Like, for instance, LeBron James got Warren Buffett on the phone. And your average graduate from Harvard MBA school doesn't get that opportunity, okay? And so I think that the media could do a better job of reporting on how they're using the opportunity to advance their own agenda and use their platform as a means to an end as opposed to the end.
And there really isn't a better example of that than Magic Johnson, whose empire is now worth about $700 million, and his foundation, when he became HIV positive, was contracted that virus, people were walking across the street rather than to be near him. His own teammates wouldn't work out with him because they were afraid to get this sweat on his body, because we were incredibly uneducated in 1991 about what HIV was. Most people, including myself at that time, didn't know the difference between HIV and AIDS until I started covering this story. And so Magic Johnson, because it was happening to him, and this is a man who's a hugger and a toucher and likes to be around a lot of people, suddenly he's a pariah, and he said, okay, so this isn't going to work for me, so I've got to educate everybody about HIV. You cannot get it from sharing my cup. You cannot get it from hugging me. And he went out and educated not just this country, but the entire world, because he had the resources to do so. And his greatest gift is not, in my opinion anyway, not the way he played the game of basketball, which was a thing of beauty to watch. It is the education that he educated this country on what HIV was and on AIDS awareness. And just the other day, he was at a gathering of people, and someone had the courage to say to him, are you ready to admit now you got your HIV from homosexual sex? And he said, if that was how I got it, I would tell you, but does it really matter? And he said, who thinks they know what the #1 at-risk group in the world is today for HIV? And it's heterosexual African-American women.
Okay, so the question is, do lawyers proactively engage the media, such as by hiring a public relations firm in the middle of a matter, so as to attempt to influence or get ahead of the story and control the way the story is being reported?
Well, I agree with Lawrence, on that song, but exactly in our case, we did do that. We had a public relations firm that dealt with all the media inquiries, and every day it seemed at one point I slammed my hand down on the table and said, let me practice law. I have someone's life in my hand. And literally, 95% of the inquiries were about media requests and how we're going to, shape the story for the next day or for the next court appearance. But there are times that you're in conflict. And I remember a story where, generally, like I think Lawrence said, we don't want our clients to speak. And you don't want to give them any information that can be used against them. And I remember the day that Stallworth was going to surrender in court for the first time. There had been an arrest warrant for the manslaughter charge, and the PR people were all saying, let's put him in a dark van and get him through the underground parking garage, and no one's going to be able to throw anything at us when we come out of the courthouse. But that we want to almost like put a bag over his head and don't let the media see us going in and out. Don't let them see him in handcuffs and those types of things. And I remember, saying, I'm not a consultant, but I think this would be a great opportunity for the first time to reach out to the family of the person that, Mr. Reyes and his family, and show that he's a human being and show condolences. Don't talk about the facts of the case, but just say, as a man, I'm sorry for what I did, and, I'm praying for you. And I remember, getting into screaming matches with the media people saying, you're an idiot, don't let him do this. And fortunately, he listened to me, and we did do that. And I think that set a nice tone for the case, which was very conciliatory rather than, be antagonistic.
I will say my response to that would be that I think it's different depending on how articulate your clients are. My sort of 2 rules of thumb are what you do is more important than what you say. What other people say about you is more important than what you say about yourself. So what I try to do is to have other people talking about my client. I agree with him. I mean, we could have hustled any of the clients. All my clients have always walked in and out of the courtroom, you know, without that. But you can't control the media, because, see, what will happen is I had a client one time who was in trouble with something, and, you know, you give a media interview, you let them talk to your client, there's a picture, and then when it comes up on TV, there's a split screen showing the victim of the crime while your client's talking, and you give a 30-minute interview and 90 seconds of it end up on TV. I'll give you a perfect example of that. Michael Vick gave a interview here recently to 60 Minutes, which we were involved in, and it happened without going into all the politics behind that. One of the things he said in that interview, which certainly surprised me and I think surprised everybody, is that when he was growing up, he didn't think dog fighting was that bad, because people would be fighting dogs in the street in Newport News back in the hood where he grew up, and the police would ride by and they wouldn't do anything. Now, guess what the Newport News Police Department thought about that? I can assure you this, when Mike comes back to Newport News, he's not going to have to complain anymore about a lack of law enforcement is related to him. And that's the kind of thing that would seem innocuous. That was 15 years ago or whatever it was when he was a kid. But that's why it's so difficult, because you have to think through. I don't know anybody that's smart enough to think all that through. So he makes that comment. The people back at the police department in Newport News hear that and go, when the hell did we ever drive by a dog fight and not break it up? That's BS. So I think that the best way to do that is have other people say nice things about your client, because you really can't control the press. In my experience, I was harking back to my Bob Seger song. So,
Well, what about the Stallworth interview that he did with Michael Smith, which I thought was incredibly effective, made him seem incredibly remorseful. You obviously had coached him ahead of time not to talk about. He never said what I think probably everybody was waiting to hear, which was, "Oh man, I screwed up so badly. He said, I have trouble sleeping at night." He said things like that, but he never said, I can't believe I killed this guy, because he never said that, because, again, we were talking about this little window that this case wasn't airtight, that perhaps the victim itself had a small part in how it all occurred.
Well, actually, when he gave that interview, that was a couple days after he got released from jail, so
Right.
The case was over. It wasn't pending. But, no, it was very interesting. And during that exact time, we were meeting with the commissioner, Roger Goodell, in New York about his status. And one of the things, actually, speaking about, media advice, his mother, who was a nurse, and she said, I really think it's important that no matter what we do in the media, any interviews we give, that we give the courtesy to the commissioner's office what we're doing, so that there's no surprises, especially where we're going up there to meet about his playing status. And that was great advice, because I know when we were at the meeting, that was one of the first things they said, is that you guys kept us in the loop about what you were doing with the case and with the media, so there were no surprises. But, in that interview, one of the things, as you know, if you just like a witness in a trial, if you overcoach someone, just like Michael Vick made that spontaneous comment during the 60 Minutes, if you do too much preparation, they really look overcoached, and it's not natural. It looks contrived. And so he was itching to speak. He had spent 24 days in jail writing a journal every day, and he had a lot to say, and ended up being about a 2-day interview, but it was obviously edited. But the interesting thing about the media was that, you know, everyone wanted that first interview when he got out of jail. And so that was the interesting part of all the different journalists that were calling and saying, remember, you promised me on March 9th that I would get the first interview. And I'm like, I've never spoken to you before. And there was people flying down to Miami and saying, you know, that with their camera crew that we have the interview. And so like Jackie and Lee were saying, it's a very competitive business. And I saw that firsthand, that it really got cutthroat, that, you know, the journalists, even within their own organization, you know, I won't name the organization, but I had one reporter, you know, said, you know, I'm mad that you gave that interview to him. I'm like, but don't you work for the same TV station? They're like, this is a competitive business. I want that interview. And so there's a lot of pressure out there to get the first story, but get it right.
But if he had had a relationship with you before, maybe he would have gotten that, instead of expecting once the story breaks, now I'm going to all of a sudden do that. And right? I mean, isn't that part of it?
Well, I think with, you know, like with athletes, they have agents, they have, you know, advisors, and a lot of times they have relationships with journalists, and, you know, and they go through those people. It's just like anything else.
Christopher, Lee, Jackie, and Larry, thank you for coming to Washington, Lee. Thank you for these very thoughtful and interesting remarks.